I've been single my entire life. I really don't mind it, it's just how I've always been. And yet, I still buy Valentine's candy and a card every year. That simple thing saves my life. I moved to a small town right before starting high school. It was difficult trying to make new friends and adjusting to an entirely new place at the same time. By the time February rolled around, I was finally feeling as if I'd gotten into the groove of things. I had only made a handful of friends, and to my shock the first time I was ever asked out on a date was a week before Valentine's Day. I felt awkward going out with a girl who I'd never spoken with before, so I turned her down. She got angry claiming she had other options and was just being nice. That might be the case, but her extreme reaction confused me. When I was able to, I asked my friend Travis about it. "Oh yeah, you die if you're single on Valentine's Day. Get your heart ripped out and everything. So, find a girlfriend for the day," he explained, and I scoffed at the idea. "Come on, you don't expect me to believe that, do you?" I asked, thinking he was just pulling a joke on the new kid. He acted as if he was just giving me some facts. He was looking at me as if I was crazy for not knowing about getting a date or dying. I told him he was crazy, but he just shook his head. "It happens every year. Someone gets their heart ripped out. It might not be in this town, but it's nearby, and it's always someone single. I guess you can risk it, buy why? It's just one day," he said, trying to defend his point. This was before everyone had a cell phone in their pocket, so I couldn't look up deaths of people missing their hearts right then. I made a note to research it later, so I could call him out on his urban legend. I crossed my arms, still not buying what he was saying. "That's stupid. Are you saying, what? Someone knows you're single and kills you?" I pressed. "A person doesn't do it. Some sort of monster does. No one has lived after seeing it, but people said they heard drums and then found someone without their heart." Travis was again looking at me as if I should know all this. "A Valentine's Day monster? Really? Well, Christmas has Santa and there is an Easter bunny, so why can't Valentine's Day have something?" For the next 10 minutes I roasted his idea and belief in the Valentine's Day monster. At least he could take it all as a joke, even if he did believe the murders were real. He wasn't positive a monster was doing it, but couldn't offer up any other reason behind the deaths. And he wasn't risking it. He already had a date lined up with a girl he didn't even like. I still thought the entire idea was dumb. The rest of the school didn't share my outlook. As the days slowly got closer and closer to the fated day, the students got paired up with each other, some done out of safety, others using the monster as an excuse to finally ask out their crush. I received a few pity offers, but I refused all of them as an act of rebellion against this stupid small town's tradition. I just watched as everyone started dating in fear of death. The stores sold out of candy and cards pretty quick. Normally everywhere would be flooded with red and pink products. The shelves were barren a few days before the 14th. Now, I refused to accept any offers, and I didn't plan on asking someone out either. The school offered a program where you could buy sweetheart candies to be delivered to class for a small fee. I didn't mind getting my new friends one each, all while making up silly names to put on the card of who they would receive it from. It was the only thing related to the whole day I gave into. Aside from buying a box of chocolates for myself, the chocolates were just a normal box of assorted types from the grocery store I'd gotten with some money made from doing chores. When I bought them, the cashier slapped a heart-shaped sticker on the box without my permission, a small one for someone to write who the box was meant for. With how crazy this town was over the holiday, I didn't blame her. By that time, I'd been so overexposed to anything Valentine related, just seeing the sticker put me off eating the chocolates. I shoved them in my backpack to forget about them until after the 14th was over. I really wish I had taken the entire thing a bit more seriously. It wasn't until the night before Valentine's Day that I finally looked up the murders, finding them to be true. Dread started to form in my stomach as I scrolled through the library computer after school while waiting for my father to pick me up. I didn't find all the mysterious deaths, but enough to make me worried. 3 people were found with their hearts missing. The police said that from the state of their bodies, they were killed on Valentine's Day, even though their bodies weren't found right away. An entire town was warning me about this, and yet I still sat in shock after finding out it was true. My father finally got me from school, but told me I needed to walk home the next day. I sat in the car, silently debating on what to do. He just chalked up my distress state as normal teenage behavior. I didn't sleep that night. I tried thinking of names of students that might not have a date, all while knowing it was useless. When the clock turned midnight and it was official the 14th, I nearly had a panic attack, convinced the monster would swoop in to take my heart. The only way I got through that night without a mental breakdown was to shift my train of thought back to what it was before looking up the murders. A Valentine's Day monster was stupid. It wasn't real. Some heartless store manager saw the murders and made up the story to sell more products through fear. That was it. It had to be it. I remained awake all night. In the morning, my mother noticed how I looked and offered to let me stay home. I refused, secretly hoping I could find a date if I went to school. The place was abuzz with new couples and gift exchanges. As I walked down the hallway, a few students looked at me with pity in their eyes. Most knew my single stance and how I would be the monster's top choice, if it was real. No one went near me that day if they could help it. My few new friends awkwardly tried to find reasons to rush off if I tried talking to them. All of them having temporary new girlfriends gave them a good enough reason to be left out. My candy heart prank wasn't funny. Some thought it was, but I couldn't find the humor in anything that day. Instead, I spent it looking over my shoulder, expecting to hear drums at any second. The final bell rang and Travis was brave enough to walk over to me for a chat. I think he thought this was going to be our last conversation. The idea got him motivated enough to walk over, but not to find the words. "Do you, want to come over? I am going out today, but maybe we can hang out beforehand? There is a really good show," and he trailed off feeling awkward. "It's fine. I'll just chill at home. My parents are going out and won't be home until after dinner, so I have the entire place to myself." That never happens. They finally think I'm old enough to be trusted to be left alone, I explained, determined to still not believe in this nonsense even though I was terrified. Travis nodded, looking pale. He wasn't brave enough to press me on hanging out. After all, he was certain I was going to die that night. He didn't want to be around to see it. "I'll talk to you tomorrow," I said, and gave him a shaky wave. He gave one back, and started to hurry over to his new girlfriend. When you're a teenager, everything is a big deal. As I walked away from school towards home, I felt like I was walking towards my own death. The sky was overcast. It made me feel even more gloomy. I kept mocking myself for my mood as I walked along the neighborhoods that had become familiar to me over the past few months. Finding a small rock, I started to kick it as I walked, trying to take my mind off the fear in my chest. A car started to drive along behind me with such loud music I could hear it thumping through the air. I watched it cruise by, a bit annoyed over the sound. If you're going to blast music, at least play something good and not something that just thudded. As the car kept going down the street, the music went with it. But a hint of the thudding remained. I stopped, confused on why I could still hear the sound if the car was so far. When it finally turned out of sight, I realized the car wasn't the source of all of the noise. My heart started to beat so fast and hard it matched the thudding rhythm that I could swear was getting closer and closer. I didn't look behind me, or even get angry at myself for getting scared. I just ran down the street. I should have run up to one of the houses asking for help. I was so frightened nothing rational came to mind. I ran like crazy all while that beating followed. I wished this was a prank but didn't stop running to find out. My mind was unable to work as my lungs burned from the mad dash. For a moment I thought I was losing whatever was chasing me. I stumbled, nearly falling over a crooked sidewalk square in front of my house. I couldn't tell how close the thumping sound was over my own heart. Sweat poured down my face and I felt faint. I slammed into my front door, banging on it before I remembered my parents were out. I nearly screamed in frustration. The door was locked and my keys were buried under my books inside my backpack. That thudding sound was all I heard. It was so close it rumbled in my chest. My hand shook as I fumbled to get the zipper open. I was scared to death and couldn't keep my eyes open. Squeezing them shut, I felt around in my bag for my key. My hand brushed against it when a puff of wind came across my face. I smelled something sweet, and then the wind came again. To my horror, my mind clued into the fact it wasn't the wind but something breathing on my face. It was too late. Even if I got my key, I couldn't unlock the door before whatever brought the heart-thumping sound took my heart too. I refused to open my eyes to see the monster I now knew to be real. I love the sound of your heart. It's a shame it's alone. Let me add it to the others. The voice that spoke wasn't some prank. It was twisted and beyond anything a human could make. My mind was racing. I felt a sharp tip of a claw poke my chest, leaving a small cut through my shirt. A cruel laugh came as I whimpered in fear. With my hand still in my backpack, I felt something that was not my books or my house key. A crazy idea came to mind. It was either that or death, so I grabbed a hold of the only thing I could think of. Yanking the box of chocolates from my bag, I held it out to the monster I still refused to see. My voice strained and shaking, I asked it a question I prayed would save my life. Will you be my Valentine this year? My heart nearly beat out of my chest. Opening my eyes a crack, I could see the box in my hand but not the creature that brought along countless heartbeats that mixed in with my own. I should have died. Instead of clawing out my heart, the twisted hand with razor-sharp nails reached out and took the box. I forced my eyes shut, my entire body shaking. Something brushed my face, causing me to tense up so much it hurt. That clawed finger brushed some hair from my face with another cruel laugh. What a cute child you are. I'll accept this gift this year, but someday I'll be back to claim your heart. I bit down on my tongue, trying not to scream at that horrible voice. With one final laugh that rattled my bones, the thudding stopped. It took me forever before I gathered up the courage to open my eyes. Nothing was on the front step. I was alone. If it wasn't for the rip in my shirt, I would have thought the whole thing came about due to stress and lack of sleep. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I mean, who would believe me? I went to school for the first half of the day on the 15th. I had barely slept for 2 days and needed to take the rest of the day off. But I didn't want my friends to think I died. All of them looked shocked I'd lived. I just said I got lucky. The school moved on. The short-lived relationships caused by that day fizzed out. As time crept along, I started to dread knowing Valentine's Day was coming yet again. I bought more candy, roses and a card, expecting a visit from a monster. I should have just gone along and dated someone, but somehow the idea of it was more stressful than dealing with a monster. I anticipated and feared Valentine's Day, only to have nothing happen. Nothing happens besides the fact that the gifts I addressed to the creature go missing overnight. As the years carried on, I kept buying different gifts with the same result. As I've gotten older, I've heard those terrible heartbeats faintly on Valentine's Day. Each year the sound gets louder. I think this year is finally going to be when that monster shows itself. Again, just asking someone out may save my life. But, I think if the monster does show up I'll ask it the question yet again, but this time I will keep my eyes open. You still haven't told me why you asked me out for Valentine's Day. I reminded Kyrie. Don't worry, she smirked. If you haven't figured it out by the end of the night, I'll tell you. Her gloved fingers slid between mine and she gave my hand a little squeeze. I couldn't believe this was happening. I'd had a crush on Kyrie since the moment we met, even though she'd shown up at my apartment with a guy I couldn't stand. Johnny was my roommate's best friend. He and his crew only ever showed up after midnight, drunk, high, and looking for trouble. Things were always broken or missing in the morning, but my roommate Nate refused to control his friends. The night I met Kyrie, I woke to the sound of drunken giggles and the apartment door slamming open. What are you just standing out there for? A slurred voice shouted. Come on in, it's cold, I groaned. Johnny. In the main room, I could see my roommate Nate leaning boozily against the wall. A big blonde girl tried to dance on our coffee table and kicked a hole in it. Meanwhile, Johnny was ranting about a band he hated and preparing a line of coke on a handheld mirror. Blood rushed to my head. I was shoving my way toward him before I had time to think. My parents had struggled with addiction all their lives, and a dirty needle had been my mother's death sentence. I didn't want to see that stuff, didn't want it in my home, where I lived. Put that away. Get it out of here, I snapped. Come on, man. It's my party fuel. Don't like it? Go back to bed. Johnny sneered. A short girl with frizzy brown hair watched me carefully. It's his house, Johnny. His rules. The girl rolled her eyes. Don't like it? Get your own place instead of mooching off of Nate all the time. Johnny turned red and glared at me, but he also put the coke away. Kyrie introduced herself, but I can't remember anything about the conversation. I was too focused on her dark hazel eyes and how my heart was racing in my chest. After the party, she did something none of Johnny's friends had ever done. She stayed to help clean up. By the way, Kyrie asked, wiping a red Jell-O shot off of the counter, what are you doing for Valentine's Day? Well, it's a Tuesday, so probably work and then the gym. I laughed, then started rambling. I couldn't help myself. I mean, I'm sure I'll end up getting on a dating app or going to a bar, because nothing's worse than sitting at home alone on Valentine's Day. How about I pick you up at 8? Kyrie asked. My jaw dropped. At some point I must have nodded, because here I was, on my first date of the new year, if it was a date. Even when we walked hand in hand into the ice skating rink, I wasn't completely sure what I was doing here. Unsurprisingly, the skating rink was packed with couples. Some twirled, others stumbled, but as we laced up our skates, Kyrie pointed to a young man and a 5-year-old child. Look at those two. What do you see? She whispered to me. A single dad, I guess? I grasped for more details. The handsome young man held the boy's hand, teaching him. They're both struggling, so I guess it's their first time here, and judging from the way he keeps looking around and checking his watch, he's probably meeting somebody here. You notice things? Kyrie raised an eyebrow, impressed. That's one of the things I like about you. Keep watching. We made our way onto the ice. I did my best to keep an eye on the pair in the sea of skaters. A strikingly beautiful woman with raven hair stepped effortlessly onto the ice, all smiles. The man grinned and waved. His date was here. He embraced her, but his boy tried to pull away. The kid stomp skated away, looking over his shoulder with wide-eyed fear. His father and the new date followed. The man barely seemed to notice his son. He just stared into the woman's eyes dreamily and allowed her to lead him around the ice. I had to admit, I understood the feeling. I couldn't say exactly what it was that made the raven-haired woman so special, but it was hard to look away from her. She twirled her date gracefully and pressed him against the rink barrier. Leaning in close, she whispered something into his ear. He lay back and closed his eyes, savoring it. Like he couldn't believe his luck. Meanwhile, the boy was running out of energy. He grabbed his knees, panting, and the raven-haired woman shot across the ice toward him like a swooping owl. An expert skater, she clamped a hand over his mouth with one hand and guided him to the exit with the other. It was over before I could react, before I even realized what was going on. A sea of happy couples blocked my path to the door. The boy's father rubbed his eyes, glancing around like a man waking from sleep. Then the panic set in. He stumbled around the ice, grabbing people, asking if they'd seen his son. Kyrie tugged my hand gently, urging me to follow. But by the time we reached the packed lobby and clumsily pulled off our skates, I knew that it was already too late. The raven-haired woman and the boy were long gone. I stared, slack-jawed, at the man's babbling attempt to explain what had happened to the rink attendant. Kyrie tugged my hand again. "We should go. You knew." In the snowy darkness of the parking lot, I confronted Kyrie. "How?" She smirked and kept walking. "Hey," I shouted, "that man's son could be in danger. What's going on?" "Like I said, you notice things. I'm confident you'll figure it out." Kyrie looked up into the cloudy night sky and sighed, an unreadable expression on her face. "But first, you sound like you need a drink. I know a club downtown." I hadn't been to a club since college. I really hoped Kyrie wouldn't expect me to dance. A burly white guy in a skin-tight black t-shirt nodded to Kyrie and opened a solid metal door. A feeling of foreboding filled me as I looked down the dark staircase on the other side. How much did I really know about Kyrie? Did I really want to go down there with a girl who I'd only known for a few hours? With a girl who'd just watched a live kidnapping and done nothing to stop it? Kyrie looked up at me with her dark, curious almond eyes. Before I knew it, we'd checked our coats and descended into XXY. With the glowing red lights, fog machine, and writhing shapes, the club reminded me of hell. The heat from so many dancing bodies made it about as warm, too. We squeezed our way through the sweaty crowd to the bar, where Kyrie gestured to a guy in a leather vest and chaps who looked like a supermodel. Moments later, he slid an old-fashioned over to me. How had she known it was my favorite drink? I reached for my wallet, but Kyrie shook her head. "Do you come here often?" I shouted lamely over the pounding music. "Almost never." Kyrie laughed. "But there's something that I want you to see." I groaned inwardly. "Not again." Kyrie gently touched my wrist. She pointed to a tall, bald African man in a suit. His hollow eyes were locked on a skinny blonde guy wearing a mesh t-shirt. The college kid was clearly hopped up on the Red Bull vodka drinks that were the club's specialty, dancing his head off in the heart of the crowd. As the hollow-eyed man moved toward him, I realized that the man didn't just have a sunken face. His eye sockets were completely empty, with nothing inside of them but hungry darkness. The crowd parted for him. People seemed unconsciously repulsed by the gaunt figure, even though I had the strangest feeling that they couldn't even see him. The hollow-eyed man halted just in front of the blonde dancer, and when he did, the young man froze. In fact, everyone froze. From the bartender to the raving crowd, all their heads dropped to their chests just as though they'd fallen asleep standing up. Deafening dance music boomed from the speakers for a completely still and silent crowd. The hollow-eyed man lifted the blonde dancer's chin. Their lips clamped together in a violent kiss. The dancer's throat grew swollen, bulging as the hollow-eyed man sucked the life from him. I tried to move, but couldn't. I was just as paralyzed as everyone else. It felt like an eternity before the dancer crumpled to the ground, a hollow sack of skin and bones. Beneath his mesh t-shirt, he had the starved look of a death camp victim. The hollow-eyed man scanned the room, apparently satisfied. For now. To my surprise and terror, he nodded in our direction before walking. No, drifting, up the stairs. The metal door slammed shut and every head in the club snapped up at once. People blinked confusedly and resumed dancing, oblivious to the grotesque sight on the floor. Kyrie took her fingers off of my wrist and gave me a look I recognized. "We should go, am I right?" I suggested, unable to control the shaking in my voice. Kyrie nodded and led me upstairs through the oblivious crowd. Outside, I lost it. "Okay, I don't know what this is, but it is not a date." "Huh?" Kyrie put a fist on her hip. "I thought for sure you would have pieced everything together by now." "This isn't funny," I shouted. "People are getting hurt. What the hell was that thing?" "Come with me to one last place." Kyrie grabbed my hand with both of hers. "If you still don't understand why I'm doing this, I'll tell you after, I promise. Besides, aren't you hungry?" I was starving, actually, but it was after 2 a.m. and the roads were slick with ice. Where the hell was going to be open at this time of night? 30 minutes later, Kyrie watched me wolf down my syrupy waffles and cheesy hash browns with a bemused expression on her face. "Sho, what do you want to show me out of pancake-kuze?" I asked through a mouthful of food. "I just wanted you to eat a nice meal so you don't start feeling faint." Kyrie smirked. "Don't you believe me?" I shook my head. "I just saw a guy get his guts sucked out like he was a goddamn crazy straw. I'm not sure what to believe anymore." "Good. That means you're getting closer to the truth." Kyrie ran her fingers up my forearm. "Come to the bathroom with me." "What? Here? Now?" I looked around incredulously. Kyrie lifted an eyebrow and guided me toward the restrooms. I blushed, sure that someone would see when Kyrie yanked me by the collar through the door of the men's restroom. There was no one standing at the 3 sticky urinals or sitting in either of the 2 stalls. No one who I could see. Anyway, Kyrie took me into the smaller stall, locked the door, then pulled me up so we were both standing on the toilet lid. There was barely enough room on the white plastic for both of us. I could feel our chests pressed together, her fingers on my back. The restroom door flew open and a guy in dirty black boots staggered in. "Dumb slut," he moaned to himself as he struggled to find his zipper. "I spent like $30 on her tonight. She owes me." Through the crack in the stall door, I could see where the drunk braced himself against a urinal. It was Johnny. From where he stood, pissing, he couldn't see the pale, naked, genderless figure that was crawling out of the ceiling tile and down the wall. Kyrie covered my mouth a split second before I screamed. The pale thing approached Johnny silently from behind until its gnarled toes were practically touching his heels. Oblivious, Johnny zipped up, but before he could turn around, the pale thing stepped into him. Johnny's clothes and skin yielded like foam as it slipped on his flesh like a pajama onesie. His face shifted from shock to agony, and finally to horror before finally settling into an expression of featureless calm. The new Johnny paused in front of the mirror, trying out his hands and fingers like stiff new gloves. Those hands combed apart into Johnny's usually unruly hair, then caressed his chest with the glee of a long-caged animal finally set free. Every trace of drunkenness was gone. The door slammed shut as a shiny new Johnny left the restroom with swift, professional strides. "What the fuck?" I mouthed to Kyrie. She jumped gracefully down from the toilet, unlocked the door, and motioned for me to follow. There's things like that everywhere, aren't there?" I stammered. "We just don't notice them. Especially tonight." Kyrie nodded. "All the eager couples, the first dates, the hookups, the alcohol and loneliness. Valentine's Day is a feast day for creatures like these. You said that there was nothing worse than being alone on Valentine's Day. I wanted to show you that you were wrong, and to protect you, if you did go out." "But why? When you yelled at Johnny that night, I could tell that you'd lost someone special to addiction." Kyrie rolled up her long sleeves. "The track marks were too obvious. I couldn't stop myself from reaching out to touch them." "I did too," Kyrie went on. "Myself. Two horrible truths struck me at once. There was no pulse in the veins beneath my fingertips, and, according to the mirror across from us, I was alone in the men's room. I was already on my way out from an odd when my sire sunk her fangs into my neck. It's a shame. If we'd met when I was still alive, we might have been very happy together." I backed away until my back pressed against the cold tile wall. "I hope you heed my warning when I tell you to hurry home, and that you remember this lesson for next year." Kyrie smiled. "The night is young, you see, and I still need to feed." A random woman on the street gave me a Valentine's Day card. I wish I hadn't opened it. It read, "Will you be mine?" There was no name, no one to whom it had originally addressed, just a crumpled red envelope, and a, mostly, blank white card, with the aforementioned question written inside on the right. The black ink had smeared, either at the time of writing or sometime during its travels through the curious woman's pocket. It somehow made the question seem sad, desperate. She gave me one last glance, then stepped away, mingling with the crowd that seemed to appear from out of nowhere at that very moment. I didn't know what to do, and had anyone else given it to me, I probably would have tossed it. But the woman had been strangely, unconventionally attractive, so I kept it. I used it to buoy my spirits after what had been a particularly frustrating day at work. She could have given it to anyone, but she'd chosen me. Back home, I set it on the kitchen counter and started to make myself something to eat. A few minutes into dinner preparations, I got this feeling in the back of my neck, like there was someone watching me. Turning around, I scanned my small apartment, able to see the entirety of the kitchen and the living room beyond from where I was standing at the stove. There wasn't anyone in sight, and yet I still felt as if I were being observed. It was around 8 p.m., night had already set in, but my living room curtains were still open. I crossed the room, closed them, and returned to the kitchen. The ominous feeling lingered, but I ignored it and finished cooking. Halfway through eating dinner there was a knock at the door. I'd never had anyone stop by to visit before, so the occurrence was at once alarming. I sat there, frozen mid-chew, hoping that there'd been some kind of mistake, but another knock came. Rising from the table, I gripped my fork in my hand and crept toward the front door, trying not to announce my occupancy of the apartment. Reaching the door, I peered through the peephole, not exactly dreading what I'd see, but hoping not to see anyone. My hope panned out. There wasn't anyone there, and yet this unnerved me, because I hadn't heard any departing footsteps. Carefully, fork gripped tightly in my right hand, I opened the door an inch. No one occupied the space beyond, so I opened it all the way. The threshold was empty. Both ends of the hall were empty. I didn't notice the evidence that anyone had even been there until I took a tentative step into the hall. Turning around to re-enter my apartment, I saw that someone had written something on the door, an unsettlingly familiar phrase, "Will you be my mine?" And just like the ink in the card, the writing, dark paint, I hoped, was smeared, the letter E and mine no more than a trailing blot. I hurried back inside and slammed the door. My heart was going crazy. I sensed that something was happening, that I was being subjected to some kind of prank or harassment. I had to hold onto the wall as I made my way back to the kitchen, my anxiety making my steps unsteady. As I returned to my seat at the table, my appetite utterly lost, I was suddenly beset with the urge to look at the card again, to read it again, even though I knew what was written inside. I went over, grabbed it from the counter, and sat back down shoving my unwanted dinner aside. I withdrew the card from its envelope and set it on the table, a feeling of mounting unrest making my hands tremble. The blank white face of the card seemed to augur some terrible yet unguessable news, an infinite array of cryptic possibilities. Finally, I willed my hands to open the card. Inside, written on every single inch of space, was the phrase, "Will you be mine?" Over and over, in every direction, some instances more erratic than others. There was a terrible and terrifying variety to the scribblings. I'd never felt more disturbed by such a relatively simple thing. Will you be mine? Will you be mine? Will you be mine? I threw the card away, but after a few moments spent on the couch trying to calm myself, I got up, fetched my candle lighter, and burned the card in the kitchen sink. As the flames consumed it, crumpling and blackening the material, I felt a new sensation, not exactly nausea, but a bodily lightness. I gripped the counter, attempting to steady myself. It wasn't until I had practically keeled over that I noticed the fumes weren't gray or black or the color of any smoke I'd seen before, but red as the envelope the card had been in. Consciousness began to ebb away just as I heard the front door open. I remembered then that I hadn't locked the door, I'd merely slammed it in my panic. You idiot, I thought to myself as darkness took me. I awoke on my kitchen table, and the first thing I noticed was the chill. I was naked, had been stripped completely. Given the circumstances, as terrible as they were, I expected to be bound, but I was not, and promptly rolled off the table when I shifted my weight. I landed hard on my shoulder, and briefly hoped that I'd pass out again, if only to stop the flare of pain. Recovering, using the table for leverage, I stood up. My senses were rekindled completely when I saw what was smeared on the table's surface. It was, unmistakably, blood. My blood. As if activated by the sight, my nerves exploded, and pain coursed down the front of my body. I fell to my knees, my body overwrought with agony. With one eye open, the other closed, as if that had somehow mollified the pain, I examined myself. From the top of my chest all the way down to my groin was the word mine, carved into my skin, as erratically as the darkly enigmatic question in the card. It was like I had been claimed, the word lacking a question mark, the wounds, still fresh, a grisly statement of ownership. Every movement, no matter how subtle, brought a new spike of breath-stealing pain, so I just stayed there, kneeling on my kitchen floor, as errant streams of blood trickled from the wounds that had not yet coagulated. My one attempt to call for help brought so much pain that I almost fainted, so I refrained from doing even that, not wanting to bleed out while unconscious. I stayed like that for over an hour, until my body had grown somewhat accustomed to the debilitation. Then I stood, cringing against the only slightly diminished agony, and shedding no small number of tears, and called the police. They came, I was taken to the hospital, and they investigated what they could of my apartment and the evidence therein. I've yet to hear any news of a lead or idea of the perpetrator. They've only informed me that the card, the one I'd burned, had been taken into evidence. I was shocked at this, and it must have shown on my face because the officer asked if something was wrong. I asked him how they had recovered the card, given what I'd done, and he said that there wasn't anything wrong with it, that the alleged fire hadn't damaged it at all. An itch in the back of my mind compelled me to ask him another question, even as I grappled to comprehend what he'd told me. What did the card say inside? The officer met my eyes for a moment, a look of slight bewilderment on his face. It said, "I'm glad you're mine. Once I'm well enough to leave the hospital, I'm finding a new place to live. The landlord can have everything in my apartment. I'm never going back there. For the first time in my life, I'm happy I'll be spending Valentine's Day alone."